Do you know how I personally call these weekly economic reviews I do every Wednesday? The Chronicles of Disaster. Russian official media is silent these days. They don't do sugarcoating, they just hide the information and they silence it. Now, I do a lot of research targeting the economic situation, but I really have to dig deep, very deep, to get the data these days. On the microeconomic level, I look into large companies. So basically, I'm getting a lot of small pieces of information on Russian economy, and I put them together to get a big picture. I connect the dots, and what I am seeing these days is it's worse than I thought it would be. I called this situation in Russia the economic tsunami. It's Armageddon, really. The latest news: over 35,000 farms are gone. I see famine on the horizon, and that's not clickbait. Let me explain. Howdy, howdy, everyone. My name is Konstantin, and welcome to Inside Russia. Usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian here. I am Russian by birth, analyst by choice. I lived it, I studied it, and I report it. I make Russia make sense. No BS, propaganda, or lies here, just the truth, common sense, and logic. And some emotions too, because I am living through the tragedy of the demise of my country. Now, welcome to Weekly Economic Update. This is Thursday, November 19th. I usually do a weekly update every Wednesday. Well, this week is a bit different, but this is the weekly update. The goal of this ongoing series is to document Russia's economic transformation in real time. Weekly, consistent coverage gives a truer picture than isolated headlines. Once a week, I track the same core dashboard: rates, budget, fuel, revenues, prices, industries, trades. So you can see what actually changed, why it matters, and where the trend is going. All my reports are built on verifiable public reporting, market data, and open sources. No hype, just facts and context. Now, let's get to the analysis. First, how I do the analysis. The economy can be analyzed at three main levels, each with its own scope and focus. They are the individual level, also called microeconomic agents. It studies individuals, households, and businesses. Then there is microeconomy that studies specific sectors or markets, and macroeconomy. It studies entire national economy. And this is how I structure my weekly economic updates here at Inside Russia. Um, I start with microeconomic agents. Basically, it's about what impact changes in the economy have on lives of regular folks and individual companies. And I'll start with the individual level today, as always. And I have a story to tell you. A story of an accountant. Now, I have a person I know in Russia. I'm not going to tell you the name, where that person lives, what companies he or she deals with. I'm not even going to tell you if it's a man or a woman because I don't want to put anyone in danger. Now, let's say that it's an accounting company. The work is done mostly by one person. Quite a few companies, around 10 companies, are uh, serviced. And the person lives in a large Russian city. Let it be it. Now, I've been getting lots of stories in the past couple years from that person, and the latest one is this: the IRS have gone nuts. Russia's Internal Revenue Service are trying to get every penny it can from businesses. not really get, but squeeze, really squeeze out of a business. So the person gets a call from IRS, and IRS, Russian Revenue Service, and the agent. Now you got to understand that if you are a accountant of a company, you deal with one office of the revenue service, and then you have the manager, the person who works for revenue service. And if you work for a long time, you know each other. You know that person by name. You have direct contact. If something they see something, they call you directly, and so it's a relationship. So a call from a revenue service office person, and person notifies that two companies are fined, and there's extra tax billed to the companies. Why? Well, I'm not going to get into the details, but two companies owned by one man, 100%, two LLCs, and that man owns some commercial property. He rents to own companies, and the thing is, he does not charge any rent to his companies because he is 100% owner. So he pays uh, corporate profit, the income tax on his company's profits. So, and then that's always been like this for years now, perhaps decades. And um, the Internal Revenue Service person gets back saying, "Look, there's a new fine on both companies because they are using this commercial real estate, a facility, a warehouse, or something like that, and not paying for it. But it belongs to the same person. He pays the income tax in both companies." Yes, but there has been a new order from the Internal Revenue Service in Moscow. It's an executive order, a paper sent to us, and we must fine you according to that order. So that was a formal fine, and the fine was substantial, and the guy has to pay it. Now he has to change the way he does business. He has to come up with a rental agreement that he would rent his own property to these companies, and it complicates things. Okay, but he's fined, and the fines are legit according to this new information that came from the revenue service. Now, informally, the accountant asks the tax guy, and what the hell is going on? What are you doing? I mean, this company is already on the brink of bankruptcy. The sales are going down. You see the big picture. You see the books. Everything is done legit. And the tax guy comes back, says, "Look, we know, but we are between the rock and a hard place, because in Moscow they demand every single day more money, more money, more money, more money. And if we don't come up with new creative ways, just like this one, to fine you, then we can't get more money. And therefore, they go into after us. So we have to find a solution." And then the guy gets to the accountant and says, "Look, if you have any other ideas, you let us know, please. We'd really appreciate that." So this is what's going on in pretty much in every Russian city, in every Russian company. The government needs more money, more money, more money, and they're using very creative ways of getting the money. Now, the second story is I speak with a lot of people in Russia. I'd say that I have over 100 conversations with different people every single week in Russia. And the geography is very wide. Moscow, obviously, I spent almost 20 years in Moscow. Yeah. Moscow is, I consider it my second home. Then Rostov on Don, the southern city in Russia, 1 million people. That's where I grew up, and I lived there for 20 years as well. Novosibirsk, Omsk, Voronezh, St. Petersburg, you name it. The geography is the entire Russia. And for the past 2 months, as I'd say start in September, and I'm not going to give you numbers and figures here, okay? This is my subjective feeling, subjective understanding of the situation. This is what I, as an analyst, having all this information coming in daily and from data from different sources in Russia and outside Russia, for that matter, and regular people telling their stories, telling their headaches, telling their pains, I started getting this feeling of everyone panicking. And right now, the situation is worsening. Literally, couple last 2 months, people are getting desperate. So I want to message this thought to you. If you're interested in Russia and Russian economy and what's going on, people, regular folks, are getting desperate. They are laid off. Not all, okay, but once in a while I get this feeling, and right now, if you're laid off, things are really bad. They don't look good at you. It's a nightmare. Didn't used to be like that. A year ago, you could really find a job, not well paying, but you could find source of income fast. Now the situation is different because layoffs are massive. Now, once in a while I hear of a layoff. Every single day I hear complaints, outcries about prices, food prices going up, and prices for everything going up. Crazy. More and more businesses are closing. And the latest I heard, Moscow, the Beverly Hills of Moscow, the very center called Patriarchy Prudy Patrik. If you ever been to Moscow, chances are you've been there. The richest Russians live there. The highest, the most expensive real estate. Restaurants are closing. Very expensive restaurants, and people didn't count money there in the past. Rolls Royces, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. If you're in Patrick, you know, because you look around and you see wealth around you. And then tons of restaurants, very expensive ones. Well, they've been closing in the second quarter of this year, and the last week brought us 3 more fancy restaurants closing down in Patrick area. Now, people complain. People are afraid of the future. They're very scared of the financial situation, and they definitely see that this feeling of things are unwell in the country. Okay. Now, the story of Russian propaganda is different. They've stopped sugarcoating things, really. They just decide not to speak of the economic problems. You won't hear a story of Russian companies closing down, laying people off, or you won't hear stories that things are fine. They prefer to act as if economy is not a big part of life of Russians. Now, this is my subjective opinion, but I get this feeling, this vibe from Russian people that things are not well. Despair, fear, and sometimes panicking, if to summarize. Now, the fridge starts winning over the TV. And I'll be talking more about that later. We are seeing now the Russian people really, really have started picking up the bill for Putin waging this war on Ukraine. And, I've been telling it for the past almost 4 years. They finally start listening to me. Now, let's move to the second part of the report, to the markets, to the microeconomic analysis. The first market I would like to talk for is transportation. Big troubles in Russia's transportation system, rail transportation system, RZD. Russia, I've mentioned a few times in the previous live streams, Russia has 3 major ways of transporting people and goods. First is by air, second is by road, and the third is by railroads. And now, the most inexpensive, affordable way for Russians to travel throughout Russia is by the rail. It used to be like in the USSR, and now we're back to the times where people use rail service a lot. There's tons of railroad tracks in Russia, I think millions of kilometers, and old trains that still are going, and pretty much the entire Russia is covered by railroad tracks, and then you can get to any part of Russia by rail. Now, the one company that owns that railroad network and all the trains owns that. The only country the only company is in charge of everything is RZD. It's a state monopolist. It's owned 100% by the state. It's all long has been a source of stealing money from Russian taxpayers. It's a big business. I personally have been to the HQ of RZD. I tried to sell in my previous companies. I tried to sell service, and I've seen ways how they did business. I'm pretty sure that they still do the same. I know how they work. Perhaps I should talk about it. It's a little sensitive information, but not today. Anyway, the rumors have it is that RZD is a big problem. Propaganda is silent, of course. RZD is, for the most part, silent, but they are laying, well, they can't lay people off. They are reducing the number of work days in a week for some employees, and their employees count is in millions of people. Okay, there's so many people involved. So they start sending people away to unpaid vacations. You can do that. And they start having people to work an extra day for free. And they start having reducing work week for some non-essential personnel. Big trouble is brewing in RZD. And the recipe to get well is fairly simple. RZD have done it many times. It usually goes to the Russian government and says, we need a bailout. And Russian government always bailed them out. Except for now, there is no money. Russian government is just can't bail it out. The bailout times are over. RZD is something I keep my eyes open and monitor very closely because it's one of those huge gargantuan companies that are the backbone of Russian economy, I should say. Another backbone is Russian oil and gas. And we start seeing the financial reports from Russian oil companies for the first 9 months of 2025. And let me tell you, well, first of all, nothing unexpected. But before I forecasted, now I start seeing the reports. It's the fact. Rosneft, Russia's largest oil producer, that's under direct sanctions from the USA, showed 72% decline in net profit compared to first months of 2024. 72% decline. How about that? Now, why is that so? Very simple. Because Russian oil is, well, the company is under sanctions, not just Russian oil. Okay. The company cannot sell so much oil. It keeps on selling, exporting oil, but the higher risks of getting caught for the buyers, the higher the discounts they demand. Right now, the discounts for Russian oil are called Urals compared to Brent, $25 per barrel. Now, Brent and Urals are different kinds of oil. Their chemical composition is different, but it's still oil. And before the war, Russian Urals was always cheaper than Brent, but not by much, by $2 to $3. That's what the discounts were. $2 to $3. Well, the maximum discount recorded before the war was $7. And that was not for a long time. That was a short period. Now it's $25. Okay. And Brent is trading at 62 right now. This past week, 62. And Russian oil fell to 38.28, $38 last week. It's near the cost of full production cycle for Russian oil. It used to be the biggest bread maker for Russian budget. That before the war, oil and gas revenues amounted to up to 47% of the federal budget, almost half. Now, 22%. Net profit of Rosneft right now is less than 300 billion rubles. That's nothing for the one of world's largest importer of not importer, producer of oil. That's 3.5, well, $4 billion. That's it. Wow. Russian well-being, oil and gas, it's kaput. Now, more news about oil. About 20 million barrels of Russian oil are at sea in super tankers right now, and no ports are accepting them to unload oil. And no one really knows what to do with that oil. They just keep on going around, I guess, or anchored somewhere. The latest is the Chinese are refusing Russian oil. They're refusing Russian oil tankers to enter ports and unload Russian oil. Turkey now buys 200,000 barrels per day, and in the beginning of the year, it used to be 400,000. So Turkey has decreased buying Russian oil by 50%. It used to refine Russian oil and send the refined products, gas and diesel fuel, to Europe to sell in Europe. Now Europeans have ended that. They do not buy Russian products of refined oil from Russia. So, Turkey is pushing Russia out of its market, and it's replacing Russia with other companies. 200,000 barrels per day now, 400,000 barrels per day before, just 9 months before. That's the picture of what's going on. Now, Putin rushed to India. Obviously, I made a live stream about that. Check it out. I'm going to place a link right here. Putin rushed to India because he needs to keep on selling the oil to Indians. And, he tried to, or he actually made a sale of Russian technologies. But you know what? Just a few days later, after his visit, 4 largest oil refineries in India, refused buying Russian oil. So he's the result of his meeting, not so good. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is non-payment crisis. Russia is having a few crises right now, and one of them is very deep and very systemic. It's called non-payment crisis. Now, I mentioned it just 3 or 4 weeks ago in one of the reports, and I want to talk more about it. It is ongoing crisis, and it's worsening. I will be talking more about that in the future because it's going to get worse and worse. Now, what's happening is large state-owned companies do not pay for products or supplied or services provided. Why? Because they don't have money to pay. Russia is in a huge wave of economic crisis. It is comprehensive. It concerns everyone. That's state-owned companies and small businesses, large private businesses. It's affecting everyone and everything, including the state-owned corporations. Besides the economy being affected from a great deal, they can't. Their sales are dropping. The financing is drying up. they are affected by the general economic situation. Besides that, they are used by the state to get money extensively. I'll just give you one example. In the summer of 2022, Gazprom was still exporting gas to Europe and was swimming in money. It was one of Russia's richest companies. Um, the Gazprom back then, until August of 2022, literally was earning mountains of money. The state came and seized 1.2 trillion rubles, equivalent of $24 billion, as a one time emergency tax to help the Russian federal budget. And things like that have happened to numerous companies, and taxes, licenses, fees are increased despite the companies owned by the state. So it's one of the sources to get more money for the state. Now, most companies, including state owned, aren't doing well, but they need things to continue operating. They procure products, services from private businesses through a defined procedure. And that's actually an official law that defines how procurements are done. That law was created over 10 years ago. It's called 223 ФЗ, 223 ФЗ, федеральный закон. And I used it in my previous work when I worked for construction. We used to build power plants. Now, the law regulates everything. How procurement is done. It must be a public bidding. All companies must be allowed to enter bidding. It regulates how payments are done and everything else, really. Once you win bidding and sign a government contract, everything becomes simple. All you have to do is to deliver your product according to contract clauses, according to the contract, and you will get paid. That used to be guaranteed. Now the state-owned companies do not pay. I faced this problem before. We had so-called blacklist of companies in our company, in our corporation. We would not even go near those companies, and they simply didn't pay. And usually this blacklist came from experience. We would sign a contract with a company, we would deliver for them, and they wouldn't pay us. We would have to take them to court, and in a couple occasions even courts didn't rule into our favor. Now those two companies were at the very top for me. Personally, I supervised that blacklist, were Rosneft and Rosatom. The Russian nuclear agency, Rosatom, that builds and operates all nuclear power plants, and Rosneft. Rosneft is owned by Igor Sechin, Putin's closest business partner, friend. And Igor Sechin is above the law. Rosatom is above the law. They don't pay, and no one even wants to sue. They are afraid of Rosneft going after them. So that was 7 years ago, and I'm pretty sure it is now. So those companies, they didn't pay us, and we couldn't even sue them. I think on 2 occasions, courts did not even take our claims. Okay, they said, look, we're not going to go. That's courts. Not going to go against Rosneft. Now, these companies, both companies, are the state itself. But that was exception to the rule. And now, non-payment has become the rule. Things have changed. If it was Rosneft, Rosatom, and a few companies, I think we had like 10 or 11 on our list. Right now, it's all companies that are owned by the state. And this crisis didn't start yesterday. I have a proof. Back in March, private companies were getting together and complained. The first complaint was recorded on the 13th of March through Association of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. they filed the first complaint for state companies non-paying. You see, some Russian companies have it in their business strategies to serve exclusively to state-owned corporations. And it used to work in the past. They bought the state-owned corporations. Sometimes they're monopolies in certain markets. They bought things in large quantities and they paid. Now things changed. And what do such companies do? The large corporations don't pay because they can't get away with it. And the small companies, the suppliers, they get together and complain. And that's all they can do. I reported on a non payment crisis getting out into the public space 3 weeks ago in the beginning of November. And the news keep on coming in, and the crisis is becoming more and more acute. The number of companies against complaining against state-owned corporations has jumped by 250% since the beginning of this year. 40% of all suppliers have faced non-payments. Every fourth company out of 10, I'm sorry, every 4 company out of 10 who have supplied goods and services to state-owned corporations in Russia have not gotten paid. 4 out of 10. 4 trillion rubles are dead outstanding, meaning 4 trillion rubles the state-owned corporations have not paid to the suppliers of goods and services. 1.5 trillion are owned by the military industrial complex enterprises. Even the military industrial complex doesn't pay any longer. And I don't see how this situation is going away tomorrow. I don't know how it will improve. It contributes more to chaos, to the general economic disaster of Russia. The growing and all-consuming non-payment crisis is another phase of the economic demise of Russia. And it's serious. And it's definitely something that I keep monitoring, and I will keep informing you on that. Now, I let me take a little pause. English breakfast tea by Twinings. It's really good stuff. Yeah, it's my favorite. No, I'm not sponsored by this company. I just like the tea. Friends, if you're enjoying this message so far, please hit the like button and subscribe. If you are not subscribed yet, helps a lot. If you subscribe while you're watching this message, it gives a YouTube signal that this video is valued by people so much that they subscribe. They decide to put this channel on the short list, and it's a good thing for the algorithm. Also, after this message is over, please leave a comment sharing what you think of what I've said today. And please let us know which part of the world you're watching this from. You know, I asked this before, and the first time I asked, a lot of people actually wrote, and it turned out to be a fantastic experience. After every video I read, I reply once in a while, thousands of messages. I just can't comments. I can't reply to them all, but I read them a lot of most of them, and I it's just so amazing to know that people from all over the world are part of Inside Russia community, watching this and commenting, and it's just it's become one of my most favorite things to do on this channel. So please let me know. Let us all know, because I know a lot of other people also watch and see, where people are watching from. So please let us know where you're watching this from right now. Thank you so much. It's fantastic. Now, I would like to talk more of a Russian car maker. This company, AvtoVAZ, the only Russian manufacturer of passenger cars. Now, really, it's not AvtoVAZ. It's called AvtoVAZ, but it's a Fiat. Back in the 60s, Russia did not produce own cars, right? So it had repatriated a few factories from Germany after World War II, and it was making a couple American cars, well, stole the design. So they needed own car. So they bought a plant in Italy, and the company that sold the plant was Fiat. And basically, after was, they renamed it, and it used to be Fiat in Italy. Now it moved to Taliati, the Central Russian. It became AvtoVAZ, and it's pretty much still the same company, the same plants, and producing different models. But you know, you all see Ladas. Now the head of AvtoVAZ, Maxim Sokolov, the CEO, he complained that the Chinese cars sell their own cars in Russia for way too cheap. Because of the Chinese cars being so inexpensive, AvtoVAZ cannot increase the prices of its models, of its cars. Now, there is a new tax in Russia. It's called the utilization tax, and AvtoVAZ was behind the creation of that tax. So every foreign made and imported car into Russia, an owner must pay huge tax. The purpose of the tax is so when the car is out of operation and it goes to a junkyard, the state would recycle it. So the owner pays for the whoever's but it's crazy, right? The initial owner who buys brand new car will pay, and not just brand new, used to, for any car that gets into Russia, pays for its recycling down the road. Now, the AvtoVAZ was behind this tax because it benefits AvtoVAZ directly. The more expensive foreign cars, the more affordable the Russian AvtoVAZ Lada cars are. Now, this huge tax is being paid now. Well, that doesn't work. Discounts on the Chinese are still selling their cars way too cheaper than Ladas, even though Russian owners pay utilization tax on them. Now discounts on the Chinese cars reach up to 1 million rubles. And Maxim Sokolov complained of the biased attitude towards domestic cars. There is biased attitude, and Maxim Sokolov is absolutely right. The Russian cars are crap. Everything that comes from AvtoVAZ is crap, and then people are biased. And I'd rather buy a Chinese car, which is far from perfect, trust me, than buy Lada. Now, the question we should be asking the CEO of AvtoVAZ is, why do the Chinese sell their cars way cheaper than AvtoVAZ, the cars that are produced far away, that are transported by rail or by trucks, that are taxed twice, utilization tax and foreign car import duty tax, okay? They make it all the way from China. On the way, they pay so much to have that car, to be able to sell it in Russia, and that's still way cheaper than AvtoVAZ that produces cars right in Russia. What the hell is going on? And the second question I would ask this guy is that why does AvtoVAZ sell Russian cars, Ladas, cheaper in Belarus than in Russia? That's a fact. Oh boy. I really don't know how to describe the situation with Russian car manufacturing. In the USSR, they were producing fairly the same cars. Now they look a little different. They, you know, in characteristics, the horsepower, the speed, they're pretty much the same. The both crap in the USSR, quality was terrible. In right now in Russia, quality is terrible. But at least in the USSR, they were in the great demand, you know. And AvtoVAZ was selling as much as many cars as it could produce. Now, the latest I heard of, well, AvtoVAZ, I don't really know where it's headed to. Are they gonna close the company? I don't know. Now there is an announcement that came from AvtoVAZ that they're going to slash salaries of its workers by half. I think starting January 1st, and they claim that there are no sales. Now, I've talked a lot about Russian car sales just tanking. You know, there's the nearly zero. The new Russian cars. AvtoVAZ doesn't sell anything, but it's one thing to talk about great decline in car sales, and it's another thing to see the real result of that. And the result is people getting paid 50% less than they got paid in the previous month. And AvtoVAZ workers did not get paid much. Average salary was 70,000 rubles per month, and that's about $900. And now it's going to be 450. That's just the first step in the line of many, because what are they going to do later on into 2026 and 2027 when no one still buys Ladas and then they still have expenses? Okay, they're going to lay more and more people off, and they're going to cut salaries more and more. Now, enough about AvtoVAZ. Let's talk about layoffs. Another phase of the crisis in Russia is companies just not doing well. And what do you do when you don't do well? Will you lay your employees off? You try to save money. Layoffs are happening like a wave in private sector, and in the military industrial complex. Also, Uralvagonzavod, Russia's largest tank manufacturer, largest factory, war factory, um, minus 20,000 people, or 10%. 20. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a little too much. 2,000 people. Yes. Too many numbers. Please forgive me. 20,000. That's the total number of employees of Uralvagonzavod. 2,000 out of 20. 10%. Sberbank. Sber is Russia's largest bank, controlled by the state. Minus 20%. Minus 20%. Minus 20%. Every fifth employee is got to go. And that's happening now. They must finish the layoffs in January. VTB, another huge Russian-owned bank, significant layoffs. They announced the layoffs. They didn't say who and how many people, but they said that the significant layoffs are coming in the very near future. In Pskov province, 4 large factories have permanently switched to 3-day work week. From 5 to 4, now to 3-day work week. That's pay cut of 40%. The total amount of workers affected is around 2,000 people. Rostov, Russia's only combine harvester manufacturer, Rosstat, has announced that it will be laying people off. I remind you, it closed down in the summer for a month and a half and sent everyone on unpaid vacation. Now, so they started working again because the demand picked up a little bit because the harvest in Russia happens in July, August, and September. And now the situation is so dire that it's not switching to 4-day work week to 3-day work week. It's not sending people onto unpaid vacation. That's laying off, permanent letting go. Okay. Um, Now, what I'm seeing right now is kind of like two pictures of the reality. This is Russian economic war room. What you're seeing behind me, this is a huge table I have, a couple computers, a couple telephones, and every single day I have information coming in. Okay, I write things down, I make mental notes, and this is it. This is one of world's largest centers for gathering economic information. Okay, I do that constantly, and I'm seeing two pictures right now. The first picture is real picture. People, as I said in the beginning, are panicking. They are scared and they're confused. They don't know what to do. Many people did not expect this to come. Well, they certainly never watched Inside Russia. I've been talking about it by 3.5 years. I'm not the only one. Okay, I'm not taking all the credit. There are quite a few very good economists who speak in Russian. They don't live in Russia because you can't do honest reporting and live in Russia. You'd get arrested for that. The state doesn't like you; he targets you. Now they're outside of Russia. There are not too many, but there are quite a few. Igor Lipsis among them. He's my teacher. I grew up as economist. I was taught based on his books. He does excellent reporting. There are a few other ones. There's a second camp. Those who sugarcoated a lot in the past, but even they now are telling more and more of the economic disaster. Now, people from Russia sending one very unambiguous signal. Everything is, well, snafu, if you know what I mean. There's a different picture, a different um, reporting. That's Russian propaganda. Now, two distinct periods of time. First was mm, 2023 summertime through 2024 June. I call that period grand sugarcoating. Vladimir Putin's presidential election was coming up in March of 2024. And boy, they sugarcoated everything. And I did reports every week. And you remember, if you watch me long enough, you remember what was coming out of Russia. Now, hang on, one of my computers is running out of juice. Now, right after Vladimir Putin was elected and the government was shaken up and a few ministers were moved, few replaced, I remember Elvira Nabiulina, the person who had talked so much about how great Russian economy was doing, recovering from economic troubles, going through this economic storm well, and going around the sanctions and all of that. All of a sudden, she came up and she completely changed her point of view. She said, "You know what? We're going to very serious economic crisis." That was June of 2024. And after that, Russian propaganda stopped sugarcoating, but economic news still came in here and there. Okay, and its thing is, it was not considered such a huge problem, the economy. And it wasn't, because Russia still had reserves, money reserves. It was covering things up with money. Now, the reserves were gone in 2025, and all of a sudden, everyone realized there's a tsunami, and there's not much they could do. It's too late to run. And that was when Russian propaganda simply stopped talking of Russian economy. It doesn't exist. If you tune into Russian news, you will see plenty of things. You will see lots of things of how Ukrainian Zelensky is terrible guy, how this totalitarian state Ukraine has turned into, how Russian army is doing great in Ukraine, advancing so fast and so far, taking huge city after city and all of that. You will hear much about America, and that's information comes depending on what is the stand to Donald Trump. If he starts negotiating with Russia, he's the best guy ever, our man in Washington, all of that. And then if he places sanctions, oh, he's gone mad, he's a clown, and all of that. So it goes back and forth. That's pretty much what Russian, and a lot of news about how Russian society is helping the boys in the front lines. And that's what you see, but you don't see anything especially negative about Russian economy. And there's not much, there's nothing positive, so there's nothing really. So I call this ongoing report weekly economic review, but really it's become the chronicles of disaster. I don't know whether I should rename it. Please let me know in the comments. And again, friends, thank you very much. It's lonely to sit here in front of the camera and speak to the camera. It's sometimes, it drives you nuts. But then when you have a community of people, once you turn the live stream off and you start seeing the comments popping up, this is fantastic. That's really, really important to me. So it gives me a sense of community, a sense of me speaking to a bunch of real people who give feedback, who write back. So please help me out. Let me know. Should I rename it into the Chronicles of Disaster, or should I keep it Russia's Economic Review? Interesting. Your opinion is very interesting. Thank you. Gosh, it's turning out to be a very long video today, and answering you why I didn't do why I didn't do this report yesterday. I simply fell asleep. I was too exhausted. I'm sorry. So instead of Wednesday, it comes out on Thursday. Now, another industry I'd like to talk about is banking. Now, I'm going to give you some numbers here. And I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. 10% of all Russian commercial banks are expected to go bust in 2026. 10%. Every 10th bank, 1 out of 10. It's not me. I forecasted a banking crisis back in 22, 23. Now, there is not acute crisis, but I call it silent crawling crisis. And the crisis is the number of defaults have grown tremendously, record high, really. Corporate and personal loan defaults. Acute crisis will happen when the banks will start falling. And this is not very far. This moment is not far. Now, I have some data on this because I think, when I report on banking, I got to give you data, hard numbers. Now, 10% of all commercial banks closing, declaring bankruptcy. I don't know how to, you don't declare bankruptcy, you go bust. Banks go bust, right? So this information comes from SMOC. It's a government agency. It's a Center of Microeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Planning, SMOC. Its head, the CEO of Smog, is the brother of Russia's Minister of Defense, Belousov. Now, the Russian Minister of Defense has nothing to do with the military. He never served. He has no knowledge of military stuff. He's an economist. He started his career at Gosplan of the USSR in the 80s, and he has worked for the government all these 40 years. Now, he was economic advisor to Putin for quite some time, and then Putin made him the Minister of Defense. Go figure, right? I've talked about this guy before, Belousov. Now, his brother is the head of Smog. And then his brother, because of the older brother, gets immunity from the KGB and with he can speak the truth, and he does. His economic agency gives the data, the forecast, just like it made 10% of the. Now, this is not good, and then Russian propaganda doesn't like that. Okay, Smog, official Russian agency, economic agency, analysis agency, predicts, forecasts 10% of banks go bust. Now, Russia's private bank number 2, called MKB, Moskovsky Kreditny Bank, Moscow Credit Bank, has showed signs of big troubles. Number 2 by assets. The assets are 4.9 billion rubles, and in the last 2 months, it had defaults on loans, corporate loans, jumped by 800%, amounted to 688 billion rubles, defaulted loans. That is 28% of all loan portfolio. Total assets of the bank, 4.9, defaulted loans, 688. 4.9 billion, 688. I'm sorry, 4.9 trillion. Out of that capital, 688 billion defaulted loans. Now, Moscow Commercial Bank is a regular Russian bank, a big one, okay? And I assume that other banks, it's not unique in the way it does business, okay? They're all the same. So I assume that other banks are in the same shoes. Perhaps the situation is not as dire as the MKB, but still, pretty bad. So it kind of hypothetically paints us the current picture of what's going on in Russian banks. VTB is laying off probably tens of thousands of employees. Sber, Russia's largest bank, state-owned bank, laying off 20%. That's tens of thousands of employees. That kind of gives us a hint that not all well in the kingdom of the Dutch. Why does it happen? Well, companies and people simply don't have money to pay back loans. It's called servicing loans, okay? They stop servicing their loans. Now, Smog allows for this crisis forecasts for the crisis to happen in quarter 3 or quarter 4 of 2026. So, according to Smog, it's still at least, 6 to 9 months away. I agree with Smog. I agree with Belousov's brother that there will be a crisis. Only I think it'll come sooner. I think we will see first banks falling, going bust in April. I shouldn't say April. Late spring of 2026. We'll see. Time will tell who's right and who's wrong. The next news is a bit personal. I would like to remind you that despite being pressured by the Russian state followed by the secret police KGB, and threatened and insulted by Putin's associate and friend and the creator of Russian World, Alexander Dugin. Yes, he did that online. He even reposted my stuff on his own X account. Okay, so despite being demonetized by Google for the reasons unknown, um, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing, shaken but not broken. And I promise you, I will go on. Thank you very much for all your support, for your precious time, for watching this, liking, subscribing, for sending me comments and messages and praying with me and sending me love. Thank you for your financial support. Thank you for all the coffees you bought me at buymeacoffee.com or PayPal, Patreon. Thank you. You have my promise. I will go on. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, there's a positive news that comes from Russia. It keeps on coming, really. It doesn't change. It's just one industry in Russia that gets better and better. That makes more money. And I talk about it pretty much all the time, every single report. I confirm once more that the funeral industry in Russia is doing fabulously, hitting the record profits. They have more and more customers coming in their way. Now, those of you who know what is PMI index, it's declined for the sixth consecutive month in Russia now. In November, it reached 48.3. The company that monitors and gives this information as SMP Global. They do the research. And then I rely on their data as honest and real. Well, things are not that well. Whatever is below 50 is recession, and PMI is well below 50 and dropping in Russia. So there's not much I can comment. That just adds to this picture of economic demise that's happening in Russia. Now, let's talk about the provinces of Russia. There is a federal budget crisis going on. I've talked about it, and I will talk more before the end of the year. But Russia is a federation of 84 subjects, the provinces. In America, there are states. In Russia, there are provinces. The difference between America and Russia is that in America, Washington cannot tell states what to do. In Russia, when the Kremlin says jump, the provinces start jumping immediately, and in the process, they ask how high. That's how it works. The governors are appointed by the Kremlin. So, go figure. I pay very close attention to what's going on in Russian provinces, and the unrest usually starts at the very bottom, in the provinces, not in Moscow, not in anyway. How do we know there's an economic crisis? When companies start produce less stuff, what happens then? They consume less electricity, less heat, and less steam. In Karelia, part of Russia in the northwest used to be part of Finland until 1940. Russia stole Karelia from Finland. Let's not forget that. The production of electricity has fallen by 9% in 2025 in the first 10 months. That tells us that there's a lot of industry in Karelia. There's plenty of wood, trees, and they cut trees and process. There are tons of sawmills and things like that. So Europe doesn't buy Russian products any longer. Pulp and paper industry is down, and we're seeing in Karelia, electricity is down. Those mills, they do not use electricity any longer. They're idling. In Omsk, Omsk province is one of Russia's richest. That's in Siberia. And Siberia is the cradle of Russia's riches. Let's put it this way. In Omsk, combined net profits of all companies in the province have decreased by 19% so far in 2025, and combined losses have increased by 31%. How about that? That gives us a snapshot of what's really happening in Omsk province. But it gets even better in Novosibirsk. Now, Novosibirsk is the how do I say it, heart of Russian oil region. Oil, used to be one of the richest provinces in Russia. Now, the budget deficit of the province, each province has a budget, provincial budget. There's federal budget, and provinces have their own budgets. So, Novosibirsk, the deficit of the province is 44 billion rubles. Corporate income tax decreased by corporate income tax collection decreased by 11 billion rubles. All fines, fees, etc. Decreased by 6 billion rubles. And servicing debt, yes, Novosibirsk went to commercial banks and started borrowing money because Moscow doesn't help anymore, right? They gotta have money one way or another. So servicing their debt in 2026 will increase by 12 billion rubles. Now, this is a pretty good showcase. One of the Russia's richest provinces with so much oil. That's pretty much the whole province is taiga. There's so much wood, Go figure. And all provinces in Russia start borrowing money heavily from commercial banks. Now, if they needed more money, they would ask for federal budget. It never failed to give money. Now, federal budget, no more. The money has dried out. So they go to commercial banks, and every sixth ruble in Novosibirsk next year will be spent to service debt. Now, the debt of Novosibirsk province is 111 billion rubles. The official plan that's been accepted just now is to increase the debt by 164 billion in just 2 years, in 26 and 27. By 2028, Novosibirsk province will owe commercial banks 275 billion rubles. It shows us the magnitude of disaster happening in that province. And it's not unique, okay? It's just another Russian province. What's happening is they need money. They need to pay employees. They need to pay for the roads. They need to pay for power plants, keep on going and so forth. Subsidies, support, expenses, no money. They go to commercial banks and borrow. And that's another phase of the economic demise in Russia. And all provinces, this is the blueprint because they have no other way to get more money. All provinces in Russia following this trend that Novosibirsk I just gave you as an example. And guess what's next? Defaults. Provinces will stop servicing their debts. Well, the banks, commercial banks, can't go and sue the provinces. They know. Provinces are the state. Yeah. They're just like Energoatom and Rosneft. You can't sue them. And many banks will go bust because of that. That's going to contribute. Now, I'm done with the microeconomic analysis. Thank you. We have the third part of the report, which is macro stuff. I'm going to do things a little different today. Usually I give macroeconomic indicators, and I remind you, these indicators, they paint the big picture of Russian economy. What's really happening to the entire country. Now, inflation, the unemployment rate, things like that. So I'll be very, very brief here in terms of the key indicators, and I want to talk a lot about agriculture. Russian government keeps printing money like crazy every single week. I'm waiting for the data to come, how much they printed last week, but that's in trillions of rubles. Now, inflation jumped in the last past week. It was more than 1% um, from unofficial reports. Officially, it's becoming much more difficult to get the data. Okay, and Rosstat, I don't trust it anymore. They used to sugarcoat a bit. Now they've gone crazy. They just you know draw numbers without any basis. Okay, so I see that the inflation was um, 1.4 in a month, something like that. So 0.4, a quarter of percent this past week. Let's put it this way. And now, Russian Siloviki agencies, in particular Attorney General offices, local offices, write letters threatening food companies that produce food and sell food, the retailers, not to raise food prices until New Year holidays. Okay, they cannot, by law, they don't have any rights to do that, but they write letters and tell, please don't do that, or you're gonna regret. Okay, and well, how can you not raise prices if you buy prices at higher, at higher level, at higher buy food at higher prices? How can you not raise prices reselling it? I mean, I don't understand. But it's not business any longer. That's Gosplan. That's state planning. Except for it's still business. It's still owners, individual owners of the companies, and they still are responsible to pay taxes and to pay the salaries and to pay all the expenses. Anyway, it's a funny situation. Perhaps we'll talk more about that. I want to talk about agriculture right now. I have quite a few news to you. Why it's not really macro economic report, it's more of a micro, but I'd like to emphasize on the industry as a whole. Okay, that's a huge part of not just Russian economy, but the life of Russian people, that I've decided to talk about it in this third part. Now, in the past, and I want to remind you this, in the past, I've said many times that I never believed Russians would go starving. I never believed there would be famine in Russia. Now let's get to the news. American investment fund called NCH Capital was branded extremist organization in Russia. Um, it owns a company called Agroterra, and this company is one of largest land owners in Russia. It's a huge agricultural holding, and Russian Moscow court recognized that this U.S. investment fund, extremist organization, and Russia's prosecutor general um, is threatening to seize its assets. Now, major agricultural assets in Russia and Ukraine, actually both countries, uh, Agroterra, one of Russia's top 20 landowners. So it was seized and already put under temporary state management by the presidential decree. At the same time, VTB CEO openly talks about buying NCH assets, building a national agricultural champion company based on seized farms. It matters because this is a textbook case of creeping renationalization and politically driven expropriation in agriculture. It's been happening, and this is a showcase, really. This case has a added twist that the foreign capital and Ukrainian connection are now framed and labeled as extremist, and that is how the government is using this tool to actually steal business from rightful owners. Definitely is going to affect Russian agriculture markets because the state cannot run things effectively. Okay. News number 2. Russia zeroes export duties on wheat. Um, the Ministry of Agriculture has reduced export duties on wheat and mesclun from 8.9 rubles per ton to 0 for the period of from 10 to 16 December 2025. This decision follows earlier um, steep reduction in October and early December, and formally registered as liberating trade intervention. This shows acute concern about export competitiveness against the backdrop of strong ruble, low world prices, well, dropping prices, and the sanctions, international sanctions. All that directly hits Russian budget revenue. Previously, it relied heavily on grain export duties, and now Russian grain exporters simply stopped exporting. Now, news number 3. Russian grain exports were down 13.3% in 2025. Recent industry data shows grain export from Russia fallen by this huge number, 13.3%, compared to the previous year. High internal logistic costs, strengthened ruble, export restrictions, and intensifying competition in world markets. It is the first clear macro level confirmation that the grain superpower, whatever, the grain superpower story is starting to break. Now volumes are reflecting the stress that farmers and traders have been complaining about for 3 years now. Remember, I even made an agricultural live stream. One thing is to talk about how difficult it is for people, farmers, to grow grain. Another thing is hard numbers. The grain exports are down. Kaboom, kaput. That's it. Okay. That's why Russian government starts getting concerned. Oh, really? About 3.5 years later, too late. Number 4. This is the headline of today's report. There is a system grain industry crisis in Russia. 35,000 farmers have gone bust. Gone. Closed the doors already. Now, a detailed world grain analysis describes a system crisis in Russia's grain industry. 35,000 grain farmers went bankrupt in the previous 5 years. The information comes from the Russian Grain Union. That data I trust. I know the head of the union, Zlachevsky, personally. I've met him. I was trying to sell my services to him, to the Russian Grain Union, in about 2016. And, well, I believe that. Export duties, quotas, and overload extra strong ruble have crushed margins for Russian farmers. Farmers now face credit rates, loans at 27 or 28%, while production costs, fuel, fertilizer, inputs are up to about 20% year on year. Every year they go up by 20%. And export business now is highly concentrated in the south of Russia. About 80% of exports from are done from Azov and Black Sea ports, are handled by just 5 companies. And I know quite well, my father, before he passed away, worked. Well, he was actually, when he passed away, he was getting ready to go to work. He worked for one of those 5 companies. So I know the business from the very inside. Okay, so this is a deep background to almost everything in agriculture. 35,000 bankruptcies. Now, how many grain farmers altogether? Different numbers. I could find some experts giving numbers from 90 to 110,000. 1/3 is gone. Can you imagine? Now, news number 5. Wheat sowing is down, replaced by oil seeds. But official harvest forecasts stay high in Russia. And that's, remember, I told you about 2 pictures that I'm seeing. In one picture, the propaganda says, you know what, everything is great. Don't worry, Russia, the harvests keep on going. And the real picture, I call one of the farmers. He goes, things are nuts. We're 50% down from 2023. You go figure, right? Rosstat data shows that 2025 total wheat sown area fell by 5.6% versus the previous year. And areas under oilseeds grew by almost 11.7%. At the same time, um, couple companies, the consulting companies, Sovcon and Icar, raised their 2025 wheat forecasts to roughly 84.5, 85.2 million, with some Russian sources talking about potentially 87, 88 million tons, including those territories that were stolen from Ukraine. So let me tell you something. In Russia, think of those numbers. 115, 120, 130 million tons before. That's wheat harvest output. Now, Rosstat says 87, 86, and in reality, it's even smaller. How about that? Well, this is why 35,000 wheat farmers are gone. This is exactly why. Potemkin statistics. Structural changes. That's what I'm going to call it from now on. Potemkin statistics. I hope you understand the term Potemkin village. On paper, yields magically offset lower area and bankruptcies. In reality, farmers are abandoning wheat for sunflower and other oil seeds just to survive. News number 6. Ban on Kazakh wheat lifted as of 20th of October 2025. This is a bit older news, but still, it stands. After months of restrictions, Russia lifted its ban on wheat imports from Kazakhstan on 20th of October. It was imposed in April 2025. Now, let's ask this question. Why would Russia import wheat from Kazakhstan, which is, by the way, one of the large importers, growers of wheat? Why would Russia be buying from Kazakhstan? It's probably because it has too much of wheat on its own, right? Its harvest was so great, the wheat is overflowing. Yeah, we have so much, let's buy some from Kazakhstan. No, very nice. This is a food security story that tells us the real picture of what the hell is going on. The truth has become so difficult to get. We have to get all these little bits and pieces and put them together to get the real picture. Moscow is quietly reopening this channel to get more wheat so Russians don't starve. Despite the official picture is absolutely different. News number 7. The state now covers up to 50% of all agricultural research and development and high-tech projects starting January 1st, 2026. In November, the government decided to introduce a scheme where the state will compensate 50% or up to 50% of all costs that companies incur researching new technologies. Now, the money is drying up. There's a disaster everywhere. People laid off, teachers are fired, schools closing down, medical personnel is laid off. And all of a sudden, they just start spending money, giving subsidies for research and development. Why is that so? Perhaps the government knows the very bad picture, real picture, in the Russian agricultural industry, and perhaps it is trying to somehow improve the efficiency. Perhaps. And news number 8, broad state aid and subsidies to the agriculture, the companies working in agriculture industry will be cut by almost 60% in 26 and 27. Well, there are different programs that used to exist. For example, agricultural drones, improving independence, competitiveness, domestic agriculture, things like that. That those programs, the subsidies are gone. They're trying to pump more money into high tech, hoping that they will get higher yield on less amount of money spent. Okay, and that strategy I understand very much because they don't have money. They're trying to get away with the littlest amount possible. Um, and this is a very clear macroeconomic signal for all of us. The war budget of Russia is eating in the long-term support of farmers. Um, the last news I have from agriculture for you today is that the targeted extra support for livestock breeding and orchard is introduced. A separate government resolution, and you can see that at the Russian government website, official website, confirms additional funding for livestock breeding and for planting and maintenance of orchards. Now, why is that so? The programs have been cut, the war budget is eating everything. Why are they giving more money? Because the situation is dire. They know that. Meat, milk, fruit on supermarket shelves, we will see less and less of that in 2026, and the prices will go up higher and higher. Um, they are trying to change that because when people are hungry, you can't really sell them a pretty picture of your state and a nice picture of the president. So they're really paying attention. No, let me give you one more news. Okay, that's news number 10. Agricultural machinery sales collapsed in 2025. I mentioned it before. Rassilmash, Russia's largest combined manufacturer, announced layoffs. Well, announced that it's going to lay off people. The grain crisis is spilling over into machinery, and this number of machines sold, it kind of proves the disaster that is happening. The fewer farmers, Of course, the fewer machines sold. It makes perfect sense. That's two dots put together, okay? Rosselmash has reported the sales of grain harvesters 3,900 units this year, the lowest level in a decade. The company warned that it needs additional support from the government and it will simply downsize and in the future it close down. And this is it. This is it. Full stop. My father spent more than 25, almost 30 years working at Rasselmash. That was the company he spent his life, basically, work life. He was in charge of train engines there. The company is so large, they have their own railroad tracks inside. They move parts of combine harvesters from one construction facility to another. And he loved that company so much. He spent his entire life there, and it's very dear to him, and it's dear to me. I heard that name, Rasilmash, throughout my childhood. I was growing up, and well, it's a good indication what's going on in Russian agriculture. Now, friends, I collected this news. I found them significant, and I collected and I showed them to you here. All I can say is, wow, wow. Not even in the USSR we had problem with starvation. At least on my memory. Yes, things were bad, but we always had potatoes. We always had cabbage. We always had pasta. We always had bread and milk and water. And you can do a lot of things to feed family with that stuff, with that set of products. So things were not well, and there were lions, of course, and there were shortages of meat and then sausages and things like that. But we never went starving. We never went hungry. Okay, yeah, I know how to eat plenty of potatoes. Trust me, and I don't really like potatoes since my childhood. But yeah, now I'm seeing for the first time that famine is on the horizon in Russia. If things keep on going like they've been going in agriculture, famine is on the horizon. I don't like clickbait. I don't like strong words, okay? I don't like to put fear into people to improve the statistics of the video. No, I give you the truth, and I sincerely think there's Russian agriculture is falling apart. And the numbers don't lie. 35,000 farmers are gone in 5 years. 1/3. No, and it's just wheat farmers. The same is happening with livestock farmers who grow cows and pigs. The same thing is happening with those who grow sheep. Um, things are not well. I believe that Russians will go starving if nothing changes in the next 1 or 2 years. And I don't forecast any changes, planned changes for the better. I forecast a black swan event appearing, and I forecast Russia simply falling apart in the way that it's existed now. Thank you very much for watching. Please come back tomorrow for Friday crazy news update. And this was the set of economic news. And tomorrow it's going to be anything but economic news. But they're going to be so crazy. I promise you're going to like tomorrow. So thank you. Carthago delenda est.